haven't seen you here before. Or rather, you haven't seen me here before. While normally you get to see down the basement where all the magic happens, this right here is where the other half of that magic happens. If you've been keeping up with my channel for a bit now, I've been putting in a lot of extra effort into my videos, usually with a lot of cosplay skits. Sometimes they'll just bookend the video. I'll have an intro at the beginning and a nice show off at the end, usually with a nice skit. And then other times, I'll go all out, and I'll have a full-on story in between each build segment of my video, with a big conclusion at the end. Now, usually this stuff takes up a ton of hard drive space, so by the time I'm done with the project, I tend to delete it. But I figured before I do that this time, I'd like to do a quick video on how I do my special effects. This isn't a full tutorial or anything, but I figure I show you all the time how I make my costumes and props, and I like to consider this stuff to be an extension of that art. So I might as well show you how I do this art too. So let's dive in. We'll start here first. This is the main file. This is the file that everything finished more or less ends up on. When I started this video, and how I do most of my videos, I usually start here first. I'll do all of the raw footage from the actual build. I'll write out my script for the voiceovers, which you can see all the voiceovers down in here. I then line all that up, crop it, speed up my videos, and more or less lay out the entire build video first. This entire video took about 2 months to build. This section here, just for the actual build construction, that all took roughly maybe a week at most. The actual turnaround for this portion of the video is not that long, but the reason I'm showing this is because I needed to more or less figure out the spacing in between each of these videos. That way I knew how many skits I could more or less do in the video. So you have this section here. First, that starts out with the actual template making process. In the section here, taking that template and transferring it to fabric and doing a mock-up with the junk fabric. This one here, transferring all that to the good fabric, pinning everything together, sewing it and whatnot. This one here would be fitment, talking about my boots, and so on. So once I had them kind of figured out and separated out, I was then able to count how many spaces. So I had a space for the intro, spots in between, to more or less introduce each space. Once I had that all figured out, I already knew where everything was going to be in the video. This entire video was going to take place in the Lakeview Hotel, so I could figure out how many spacings I had, and I could figure out each of the key locations in the game that I wanted to partake in. I kept note of like key scenes, so we would have like James's confrontation with Laura in the piano room, or the VHS tape scene, or the burning stairway. Key moments like that I wanted to hit, obviously, and mix up. Everything else in between was more kind of filler. I wanted to talk about the things I needed to talk about to introduce certain things, but I needed to know where I was going to be in relation throughout that entire story. So laying that all out was kind of the first thing I had to do. Once I had that all figured out, I more or less counted that I had about 10 spaces in between everything, and I was able to start marking out what each topic was and the locations. So you can see here in this script, I kind of wrote down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and all of my locations, and kind of made some notes here and there for certain things, and then more or less worked on my script. Usually when I was writing the script, I would more or less write down first what it was that I needed to talk about, mostly. The intro was more just a obvious intro, but anything leading up to a build segment, usually I would need to talk about that stuff in particular before I started doing any kind of skits or anything. If I had a lot of things to talk about, usually I kept it just to that, but if I didn't have anything particular at all, that's usually when I started having fun with it and just finding some kind of goofy story bit to add in. But not much to talk about in the script writing phase, so that's just how I did that. Now, before any of the actual filmmaking starts, I more or less have to first figure out my shot compositions, locations, framing, and all that stuff. While I'm no film school student or anything like that, I am a fan of filmmaking. One of my favorite YouTube channels, which has been dead for like 10 years now, is Every Frame Up Painting. I do recommend, even though it is a dead channel, I do recommend going and checking it out if you are a fan of films in general, because they break down everything from framing to visual storytelling, you name it. And in that case, yes, I do some storyboarding for my shots. Most of this is all done at work while I'm trying to think of things. I usually have my script written open and very crude drawings of what is actually going on. Nothing in particular for the actual framing of a shot, but more of character placement. So for example, you have two characters in a scene, you know, you want one character on the left looking right, one character on the right looking left. That way you have a visual idea of where they are at in that conversation, in the scene, and all that stuff. But having all of that drawn out beforehand really helps plan those shots out. I can kind of get away with cheating a little bit since I am recording everything of myself on green screen, so I can actually keep myself center screen and then just position myself to the left or right, just making sure that I'm facing the right direction, and usually that's what matters most. But these things kind of usually help me figure all that out. Now, I don't do this for every scene. Most of the time, what I will do first is location scout in the game. Figure out what kind of space and environment I'm in, where I can go, what kind of directions I need to go in. That way I then have a better idea of good camera placement. I can also then just choose my camera angles then there beforehand as well, before I actually go into the green screen room and start recording. So before I actually start showing you how I do my green screen stuff, let's first show you how I do my actual in-game recording. So what I like to use here is a setting a lot of people don't seem to know about, and that is in the NVIDIA Experience app. I don't remember where the actual setting is, but it's not turned on by default, and that's this right here, the overlay. Now this allows you to screen record, it allows you to take photos and screenshots, and it puts it into its own files. This is really nice for recording literally anything on your desktop, but especially gameplay. For this section, I'm just going to choose literally any scene in the game. Location-wise, it doesn't really matter where we choose. So there's a few things I did have to do here for the actual game itself. Alright, so I had to use a few mods for this game first and foremost. The first mod I used was the Enhanced Edition. That is a graphics overhaul where more or less just the textures are upscaled. I think there's a few bug fixes in that as well. But the other one I had to use was this right here. This is a camera mod. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but I'll put the links to all that stuff in the description if you do want to use this stuff in the game. If you've seen anything about like a over-the-shoulder camera mod for Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 3, this is that mod. I don't recommend using it for a first playthrough though, but to look around and see things is kind of cool. Under the mod settings, we will enable tweaks, and already I have the player visible turned off. That's what I had to do for most of the shots where I did not want to see James. Now this allows me to move my camera around freely, also while moving around. Now there is one big problem that you're also seeing right now that is a huge problem when it comes to taking screenshots and recording on-screen video, and that's the lens flare from the flashlight. Now, I could turn the flashlight off, but then I have no illumination for the room. So thankfully that is in the actual game options itself. Under the advanced options, there is a lens flare. Just turn that off, back out, and now we're good. So that's an easy one to fix. Obviously, now I still have my weapon. I need to unequip that as well. Now, this mod does have its limitations. I can't freeze the game or anything like that, so enemies will still see me, so I need to either clear the room out first or go into a room where there are no enemies. There's also the other issue of James's static pose. If you wait long enough, he's going to go into an animation, and because he's moving, the flashlight on his chest also moves. And it's a bit tedious and annoying, but if I'm recording enough space, it's fine. A shot like this, I won't need an actual video. I can just take a screenshot because there's nothing actually happening. Now, if there's fog or rain or some kind of environmental element like that, then I will have to do a screen record. But here, an actual screenshot is fine. What I do like about this, though, is that then I can fine-tune everything from back distance, vertical camera, and all that other stuff. What this will do is move the camera out closer, higher, lower, and all that other stuff. On top of that, though, although it's not necessary for most scenes, let me give a good idea though. See how the camera clips into the wall here? This should be under the aim section, can actually disable the camera collision and get the camera behind the wall. Now, this is pretty good for certain shots. So say if I needed a shot of this character here like this, far away, I can pull the camera out through the I can pull the camera out through the wall. It's very, very helpful. But these are the tools that I use to actually get my in-game screenshots and videos. Now, I do this for my location scouting. I don't always use those initial shots as my finals. What I'll tend to do then after I get my videos recorded in the green screen room is I'll come back and then try and match up the shots perfect. But having a general idea first usually helps a lot, knowing where my camera angles need to be and all that stuff. Now to talk about the actual recording process in general. Let me go through and close some of these so that I can then show you what the actual green screen looks like. One thing to keep in mind when using green screen is that light bounces, and by that I mean wherever your light source is coming from, it's not bouncing off of that into the camera or your eye, it's bouncing off of that off of everything else until it hits your eye, which means the more that light bounces off the green screen onto something else before it hits you, it's tinting that thing green as well. So a lot of light is insanely important when it comes to lighting up a green screen. Usually what that means is you need lighting that's hitting the green screen, lighting that's hitting you, and then usually something to kind of break that barrier of light so that there's less green illuminating you. So the more you light yourself in all directions, front, back, and whatnot, the less likely chances you're going to have any green tint on you. Now, it doesn't sound like a big problem. Let's see here if I can mess around with this setting in general. I will set this back to default. I'll reset everything. And we'll just slide this over to regular green. It's not going to be a big problem for this scene in particular. You can see as I'm slowly fine-tuning everything to kind of get out all of that green. you do see a little bit of fuzziness here on the edge of my shirt. That is part of that problem. It's a backlighting issue. A lot of that green light is bouncing off of my shirt, and it's giving a very, very mild green tint to my shirt. So the more I try and get that out, the more it starts bringing out the darker green on the actual thing. So the more I get rid of it on the shoulder, the more it starts showing up everywhere else. This is why that lighting is very, very important. Another issue, let's go to that instead for another shot. Okay. All right, so this is a good shot to talk about because I don't think I can actually, no, yes I can. Let's go into this tab here. I'm going to turn the opacity down on this layer entirely. So this one's hard to tell, but you can kind of see here around the window on the helmet. See all that gray kind of filling in, disappearing? Like right there, especially right there in the top front, all of that. So the helmet has a gloss on it, so it's very shiny. And because of that, it picks up that green light from the green screen insanely well. Let's go to VFX tab 1 and turn off the green screen, and you can see that entire spot there is insanely green. No matter what I adjusted, I could not get that to be visible. So what I had to do as a result was create a second layer just for that, where I then changed the exposure for the actual green screen to allow that portion of the helmet to remain fully visible and non-transparent. And then to just have that one specific shot, then I started using masking. Now what this does, it more or less will just outline what it is you want from that video layer. But because I am moving, I have to animate this as well. So what I have here is a 6-node poly mask, and I have it animated throughout the entire video clip so that it stays within the edges of the helmet. I had to do this a lot for a lot of these scenes in the final scene. It's not that noticeable when I'm doing darker scenes like in pure blackness, because it just fills in with the darkness and you don't notice it. But with this, it was very apparent because the fog was then transparent through the helmet. So I had to do this for a lot of shots. But with that outlined and animated, it had to stay very close to the edge of the actual helmet as well, which meant I had to go through and do a ton of actual individual animations to make sure nothing was sticking out past, so it wouldn't pick up any actual green screen either. But together, it looks pretty decent. There's still a few small spots on the edges here and there, but for the majority, it caught the most of it. The worst offender, however, which I did not get in all the spots, is the knife itself, which you can see like right there. It almost just fully disappears. Not just because it's so shiny, but also like it's only 2 colors, white and black, so one of them's going to pick up one end or the other of the spectrum of light of green. Now with that out of the way, there's still another issue with the green screen and chroma keying and masking and all that, and that is the fact that I can't cover the entire room with green screen. Let me show you exactly what I mean. So you can see here that I have part of the wall and all this other stuff, a little bit of gym equipment. It's supposed to be our exercise room. I kind of turned it into a green screen room whenever I need to record stuff. But as you can see, there's a lot of purple here, and because of that, I am walking through that purple. And to get rid of that, I can't just use any kind of chroma key. So while the chroma key gets rid of most of that, I also had to use a poly mask to outline that. You can see how much it's actually outlining, but the worst of it is really as I'm walking through it here, which is where the polymasking comes into effect. As you can see, it needs to be animated almost frame per frame to make sure that it actually stays close to my body as I walk by. That way it doesn't crop any of me out in the process. I did have to use this a lot, not in every shot, but there were many scenes where if I'm doing a lot of movement, either off screen or walking across screen, anywhere where I was walking myself out of frame, this usually became an issue because the room itself I'm recording in is fairly small, and having the camera zoomed out as far as possible to get as much of the room as possible left a lot of the walls and extra stuff in the room kind of in frame. I can usually get that with some kind of cropping, but if I'm going anywhere near that stuff, especially when I was in costume, not being able to see exactly where I was, this became a huge tool that I had to use a lot. And now we get to talk about just any kind of random shots that I think are interesting enough to talk about how I did them. We'll start with some of the most simple things, and that's doors. Obviously these doors don't open in-game. Usually you just teleport to the other side, load the new map. So I had to make these doors myself. Usually what I did was... So this background image is just a screenshot. I would have to go through my files and show you, but more or less what I did was I took the image into GIMP. Okay. So here is the actual screenshot for that background. I then took this into GIMP and more or less opened up or deleted everything but the door. There were a few things I did have to keep in mind though when doing this. Let me see, I should open this up in GIMP to give a better idea. But you'll notice that the door itself is off-center. It's not centered in the image. Reason being is because when I turn this into a 3D object in Lightworks, is that the center of this image becomes the center point of that 3D object. So when I go to start rotating this image, it wants to rotate on this center line. So I put the door on that center line so that when I go to rotate it, it's going to rotate on the inside axis of that door. So all of this blank space on the side is more or less there for nothing, but it allows this door then to access right on that line. I'll show you how that works right here. So it doesn't open up a lot here, but you can see right there, that center square, that would be the center section of the actual door. Now, if I go to rotate it here, now you can see that I am rotating that 3D object. Kinda neat. It's very simple, but it's very effective as well. And then it's the same exact thing on this one. I do believe this would be, yeah, so it's the same thing. The center of the image is right on the edge of the door. And then as the door opens and rotates. Now, one thing that I cannot do is I can't take a screenshot like this and then take one from this door. What that will do then is the door is already distorted. So what I'll do is I'll go in and take a straight shot of that door as well and do the same thing. So I have a straight shot of that same door and more or less re-angled the door and everything like that. So it's a little off, but you don't notice it as it's in motion because you don't see the original door anyway. Now, one thing you do notice is that I don't have the actual edge of the door. I do that for some shots, and other times I was more or less just lazy and didn't add it. Pressed for time. I didn't want to spend way too much time on the video. Plus, I didn't think it was that important. If I was going for like full accuracy, I would have, but it wasn't anything I was super concerned with. Okay, I think this one here will be a fun one to talk about, because while we were doing a lot of chroma keying stuff earlier, this is more or less the equivalent of an opposite of a green screen. So in this shot here, let me zoom out a little bit, there we go. You can see I'm kind of walking into this fire, and then the fire is both behind me and in front of me. How I did this is actually very interesting. So the top layer is actually the same as the bottom layer. And I used a chroma key on this as well. And instead of highlighting anything, what I did was I highlighted the brightest part of the flame. Because you can use this little tool here for your color picker, and then you can choose any color on your screen what you want. And for that, I chose this right here. Well, maybe not that exact color, but you get the idea. And then instead of, because normally what that would do then is block that color out, but you just hit this invert, and now it only allows that color to be shown. What that does then, after adjusting brightness, contrast, saturation, all that stuff, it allows me to fine tune to only get the brightest parts of that fire to show up. Now I do believe, if I'm right, yes, I did a color mask on this as well. So because that's not the only fire in the actual scene, let me block me out. There's also the fire that's up here in the top. Now, doing this would cause all that fire here to show through as well, so I created a mask for that so that it blocks out anything in that green area right there. Which more or less means that any fire around my head would be more or less invisible, but the stuff down by my feet would be fully visible. And the ending result looked just like that. Which is pretty cool. Up next, let's talk about this VHS tape scene. This is a complicated mess of random things. For starters, I don't even know how I got this idea. I know I just wanted to do something goofy and I didn't have anything important to talk about. But I got this idea to turn the VHS into a PlayStation. So let's go into how this came to be. So this PlayStation model, I don't need to do all that, is actually a 3D image, or rather a 3D model of a PlayStation 1 that I got off of Sketchfab, I believe. I didn't even get it off of it, I just did a screen record and then hand animated it for certain shots, which would be, yeah, this shot in particular. What layer even is that? 5. So there was a lot of masking involved as well, mostly to cover up when James would be in front of it. So everything from his hand and all of that, and when he would stand up and the camera would pan down. The hardest part was matching this movement, because I moved this by hand with my mouse in the actual model viewer. I did this several times to get it as right as I could, and I'm surprised it landed as well as it did. It's still a little janky. You can kind of see it kind of moving here and there just the wrong way, but it's fine for what it was, and it actually worked. And then for everything here, This became a back and forth of different files. So everything that's on the screen that you see here, from what's there, that's also a static image that I had to mask out his fingers and his head in several layers. It's janky, but anyway, everything that's on the actual screen is in a separate file. So that's on this file here. So a good portion of this is from my Robbie the Rabbit video. After I had made the full video for that, I went back and expanded on the intro and outro skits for that, and more or less doubled the length, doubled the action, and all the other fun stuff that I did in that video. This intro here was done entirely separately on its own file that I did just for this. And then these clips here are from the original Robbie video with the insert coins and the gunshot, or the ammo count. Only thing I added here was the actual cursor reticle thing. I intentionally used the very crappy Homecoming logo because it looked exactly like a crosshair. I believe this was the original Homecoming logo. I can't remember if they modified it after, but I more or less animated it to match up with all the fires, and then I just made the travel from each one incredibly janky. So I pinpointed it in those specific spots from each one, but if I go into the graph, you can see that so in this here, I believe if you press Control and then click in that area, you can create more or less a curved line, and then you can adjust that. So I did that with all of them and made it insanely curved. That way it wasn't just a nice straight point, but there was a weird elasticity to it. So it looked more natural, not so much natural, but looked like somebody had very bad control over their gameplay shots, which was the intention of the scene. James is a very bad game player, so he can't hit anything. That was the whole joke. So with these insane graphs, I was able to more or less get that cursor to just go all over the place. This shot in particular was a brand new shot. As you can see here, I guess I will be talking about this next anyway. As you can see though, around the neck, I forgot to wear my balaclava that covers my neck, so you can see my neck in the thing, which is fine because you can tell that it's going to be me anyway. But I almost forgot about this, so I'll mention this as well. So there's a lot of masking. You can see nodes from the masking right here around the chest. There's a good reason for that, and I will show it now. So there was an issue obviously with the green screen and the let's see here. Okay, there we go. So as you can see in the actual bow tie, it's transparent. This is another issue of the green screen being too close in tone to the tie itself, so there was nothing I could really do about blocking that out. So again, I had to create a second layer. And then I animated a polymask around that to try and keep it in frame. And then I left it underneath the original layer. That way together, there's a lot less color bleed to see the background behind it. It's a lot of extra work that most people just, you don't see it, but it's something that I have to do so that you don't see it, if that makes any sense. And then, let's see. This is back again from the original scene. And then this was a complete reshoot. This was all brand new for the video. This is just several artifacts of smoke, me, more smoke, and then the actual background. And then once all that was edited, it then got more or less put onto the screen. Every time I did this, I believe I used an 8-piece poly mask, so I could get 2 on each corner to make up for that roundedness that's on the corners. Mask that off of the actual screen, which would be the staticness, or the which would be the static on the screen, which more or less cut a hole out of that top layer. And then I took that rendered image from the last video file, turned it into a 3D object, and just aligned it up with the background image. So it's at the same angle, at least close to it. And then just to be a little bit goofy, I started adding extra effects as well. Like this fire above, which was also green screened and chroma keyed. So the poly mask then was just to make it match up the top of the image, and then the green screen got rid of the green. I added a mild transparency because as it goes, the fire just kind of becomes more and more apparent as the fire on the screen was supposed to get bigger and bigger. Which I should mention this now while I'm doing this. Since I am recording everything in 4K, this allows me room to have extra canvas. So instead of making all of my camera swings and everything like that during all of these effects, instead I leave myself enough extra room in the frame, do all of my effects first. And then I do a final layer on top of everything, which turns into an effects tab. If you do any kind of effect that isn't on a frame or a clip itself, it throws it into its own tab, which is an effects tab. So it acts just like everything else, but it's not attached to a specific clip. So here you have like the smoke, the fire, the video clip itself, and the what's on the actual video. The effects tab will then just more or less be over top everything else. So everything more or less feeds through it before it does that. But I treated that as either a 3D or 2D kind of thing. And what this allows me to do then is animate my zooms, pans, and all that stuff for my shot, allowing me to start in, pull out. So it pulls everything out together. Otherwise, if I didn't do it this way, I would have to animate all of this stuff together, and that would be practically impossible to do that and get it to match. So it's a lot easier to do it over top everything else on its own. Okay, so this is another thing I wanted to show off how I did. So this shot here in particular, if you look closely, you can see that everything around the window is kind of slightly out of place. The reason this is, if you remove me out of the shot, you can see it a lot better. Everything is actually clone stamped. Yeah, so this goes through several weird things. I had to do several tricks to get this just right, and the reason being, is because I had to more or less erase her from the shot. So the bulge more or less brought all of this stuff inward just to make her smaller, but also to hopefully kind of keep that straight line at the bottom level to where it was originally. And then the clone stamp just matched this window into this one, and it kind of more or less just blocked her out. I did this several times, so you can see that I can't bring my mouse over to show you, but from here to here, and more or less, or was it? Yeah, from this corner here, brought that over. Now the center piece that's kind of hiding there, it's not that bad because I'm covering it up so you don't see it. The general idea was just to get rid of as much of her as possible. And then the double vision was just to hopefully blur some of it. And then this poly mask here, more or less then just cut her out again. So everything from the layer underneath, then filled that in. It's not perfect, but once you throw me over top of it, you see very little of what's actually behind. And it's kind of close enough to sell the image. This last layer on top right here is not that noticeable until you notice that James is moving from left to right, and there's a spot just right there where he overlaps me, and I had to animate a poly mask just over him. Oops, wrong layer. That then followed his arm. So I didn't have to trace him the entire way, just until he got over me. Because if I invert this, so right now this is just the full video clip, but I would be standing right here. So as long as this is not touching me at the moment, it can just stay off to the side, and then once he catches up to it, then it follows him. That way when he moves and his shoulder overlaps me, it then blocks me out for that small second. Just for those few frames. The same thing is applied here as well. You can still see some of James's hand right here. Like right there. The rowboating, or the boat rowing was still kind of janky, but the same thing was done here. Many clone stamps, mostly just to get what he had that was sticking out underneath me. So mostly his head, his left hand, and his right hand. Mostly I was sampling the large block of wood right here for each one, and then I clone stamped it over top of the heads and hands. Those all needed animated, every one of them, because they do move on frame. And then I more or less just mimicked the rowing animation. It's not perfect. You can see I kind of go out of sync just a little bit, but you know, we're not filmmaking here, so it's not terrible. This part was also interesting. This was the same thing as before with the boxes, but this time instead of boxes, I was using a workbench again. So I sat on it and then stood up on it. I knew I couldn't get that much higher than that, so I just mimed like I was going to step on the next step. And all these poly masks then were just to, because the handles on the boat were kind of in front of me. I needed to be able to have them in front of me as well. So I had to animate those as well. You can see that they don't always match the movement, because I don't need to animate them fully. I only need to animate them when it's actually in front of me. So as long as it's not in front of me, I no longer have to animate it, because that would just be a complete waste of time. And then this scene again was the same thing. I then just stood on the floor, continued the motion from the previous shot, and just stepped up on top of that, like I just stepped onto the dock. And again, I had one poly mask because this bit was just enough to cover my hand and foot right there. And once I had passed it, there was no need to animate it anymore, so it just stays still. And finally, let's start talking about the actual end scenes. This is where the majority of the actual work went, so there's a lot of fun stuff to talk about here. So a lot of these actual shots that I do in between here, I believe this one here was actually from the Eddie scene in the previous episode. This, I think, was just me putting my helmet on or doing something else entirely, but I did a quick zoom in, and I might have even been taking my helmet off. I can't remember, but I zoomed it in just to kind of give this, I don't know, an ominous look, but almost like I had just put the costume on too, right before he comes in the room. A lot of the shots here are reworked from the original scene. I believe this shot was reversed. And then this shot, we'll talk about this one. So this is the actual original shot from the game. The shot pans up from James, you see the two pyramid heads. I created a poly mask that cuts off all of that. And I traced it so it animates along with the very top of that. It's not 100% perfect, but in motion it sells. And then underneath that shot, I gotta block all these first. I have two more layers. So I have the background, which is animated on its own. While animating this, I think I tried to get it to match the background from the original scene, which would be this. Yeah, so I think I tried to match the background pan there because it comes down and then fully in screen, so it gets closer and pans. So it was a little tricky to get it exactly right, but it works. As you see, it kind of zooms in just a little bit like that. Now here you can see, to get that downward angle, I had to have my camera low and I had to stand on boxes. So I'm standing on a box here and then a stool, a stool here. Now the cutoff point is right above that, so you don't see it. But I do a lot of these things. Now you keep in mind too that I can't see. So once I have the helmet on, I am blind. Unless I have my camera system hooked up in it, but I wasn't for this to take the helmet off and on constantly. So usually I'd put myself in position, grab my helmet, and then just do a few takes and hope that I got it. Which I guess I should go back real quick to the burning hallway scene and show that too. So this close-up of me going down the steps, I do have steps in my house, but I wasn't moving my entire green screen to do it. So to do that, you can see how far out this is actually zoomed, because yeah, you can see I even use polymasks just to get rid of random dark splotches in the green screen, and you will see why in a moment. You are very much going to see why in a moment. So to do this, I have 2 chairs, a stool, a box, and then the green screen. It does not line up perfect with the actual spacing of the steps. I tried to get it as close as I could, but I obviously could not. And because of that, in walking down the steps, you can see I line up with the first step. After that, it does not. That's the main reason I'm actually zoomed in so much here at the end, so that it hides that misstep. Now it's the same deal here. Let's turn off all the polymasks and the chromes. This one's, I had myself up on a step stool, down onto the box, and then down onto the floor. I'm also doing this blind as well, so I more or less remembered where the steps were. I practiced a few times, then I threw the helmet on. I figured it wasn't that big of a fall if I was gonna make a misstep, so I would still catch myself. But you can see I'm blind walking down these 3 objects. I was only giving myself 2 to 3 steps for everything, and then I just hide it in between the cuts of the shot. Which is why I step down 2 or 3 shots here, then another 2 or 3 shots here, or 2 or 3 steps here, and then I come to a stop. But back to the final part. Yeah, even though in this shot here, when he screams no, or when he just screams, it's out of place and doesn't make any sense, but it's too funny to cut it out, so I kept it in. It's this one here, I believe either this was a still image or a frozen frame of James's head. Okay, so that was a screenshot. I more or less just had him facing down, with his head tilted down. I had to take this in GIMP again, delete all the outside stuff around the edges, and then I just blurred it to get a little bit of that fuzziness. And then with everything kind of zoomed in the end, kind of works. Another thing to keep in mind that I should have talked about, but I guess I haven't yet, is being spatially aware of where everything is in a scene. I'll go into this in a little bit when I jump back, but as you can see, like, I'm up top, now I'm walking down to the side. All of this spatially makes sense in terms of where everything is in the map and where the characters are. That door behind James is the door he came through. The room has 3 doors, one on one side, 2 in the other, and then the balcony I'm standing up on is above the double doors side. More or less, this is the lobby from the hotel in the Otherworld version. So the balcony I'm on is actually up the steps. And then the door behind him is the door that leads out to the front of the building. Let's see here. So this is fun. All of these swings are actually just me. I did a ton of green screen shots of just like some slow swings in front of the camera. And I figured I could speed up, slow down, depending on what I needed for the shot. And I just did them at a bunch of different angles. That way I had a lot to play with when I did this. So as you can see, I'm doing many different angles. And I use this throughout for a bunch of different scenes. So this shot here in particular, once we make contact, what layer is that? Layer 4. You can see I have a few nodes down here of animation. So what happens is once we hit, I bounce my character so that it plays like a bang. There's a little bit of like a cartoonish recoil. Another thing to note is I believe, yeah, so this was another one of those shots. I have it split into 3 for some reason, so I'm not going to go into detail on that. But I have the angle changed. So what layer is that? 3. You can see that the actual video clip is at a 3D angle. So I have it converted to a 3D image rather than a 2D, just to get it to come more straight rather than at a sideways, because I didn't want to go out and record more knife shots when I already had so many swings recorded. But because of that, the very bottom of the clip ends right here. So you can see once we hit, there is a line right here of missing sword. Now, it's not that big of a deal. I don't think many people are going to care about it or notice really. But yes, if you can see that right there, that is just missing sword. It should go straight out like this, but it doesn't. It's cut off and invisible. I was very aware of it when I was doing it, but I did not care. I didn't think enough people would notice or it would matter. Most of the shots I had done were just full downward swings, so I kind of kept this frozen and then I hand animated it. To do that, I kind of kept an eye on more or less this spot right here, I think, or this little dip right here, and I made sure that it kept contact with this black dot here. So every time I hand animated it, I tried to keep them somewhat close. This was also a little difficult to do, to get these swings in, because the way the knife worked was the same way that the rifle and I believe the shotgun works, was that their aim relies on his line of sight. So to get something lined up, it would even with the camera mod, it would still override that, and the camera would then change positions. So the whole reason every time there's a swing and there's a camera movement like this, in reality what's happening is I'm shifting the camera back into place to where I want it, because it was originally behind him, because he's aiming where the camera is facing. So once he would then begin the animation, I would hurry up and whip the camera around to the position that I wanted. It was tricky and took a lot of effort, so there's a ton of these clips of me just trying to get my swing in. But the few that I got actually landed pretty well. This scene in particular was an interesting one to lay out. I do like this, like the color grading here was perfect. Which I guess I should talk about too. So for the color correction here, I have this tied specifically to the clip itself, which is right here. Because if I have it on Lightworks is dumb and I hate it. So if I was to take my color correction and drag it to it like this, for some reason, instead of just applying it to that clip, it would want to apply it to this clip and down. So everything from this clip and below it. So instead of it landing on this clip alone, it would land it up here somewhere. and then it would apply that color correction to both of them. So while I'm trying to match the saturation here to the background here, it wouldn't allow me to do that because it would do it both at the same time. So I actually had to take the effect and bring it over to the routing first and then apply it there. Color matching is also kind of interesting because one thing you want to keep in mind is your black levels. You want them to stay the same. So I am a little darker on my black levels. So what I mean by that is finding the darkest spot on here, which would be maybe somewhere around here. That's not full black, it's still brown, but you want your blacks to match that. So my blacks then would be somewhere like around here in the arm or the shading right here. To get it to match perfectly, you would want those to match that. That would get your black levels perfect. If you're off that way, either too bright or too dark, it becomes an obvious CG/effect kind of thing. And color grading, that's something you usually want to aim for. But I think it's fine enough. I don't know. But usually after I do that, I tend to keep an idea of my numbers. That way I can kind of keep them consistent throughout the entire scene, because the lighting in the scene is always going to be the same. There was one thing I needed to keep in mind here on this scene as well, and that's that I needed to make sure that the viewer understood that I was going back to where the video started. So let's go back and I will show that scene as well. So what I tried to do was I tried to recreate these shots here in reverse, so that the viewer would then know that I am going backwards, which would then lead me back outside into the courtyard over top of the lake of where I was at the beginning of the game, or the beginning of the video rather. And to do that, when I did these shots, I made sure to take the paintings that I had made from the beginning of the video, made a second version of them where they were all torn up and kind of decayed to show that we were on a different version of this area, to kind of like give the idea that something ominous is going on. And then I recreated every shot, and then I started adding more and more Dutch angles. Anytime something did not seem right, I was adding a Dutch angle. You see this a lot in my dialogue with James in the previous scene, because as he gets more and more twisted in the mind, the angles become more and more twisted. So it's a tell for that. And me adding these Dutch angles here is more or less me saying something's not right here. So when I'm supposed to be going outside, I'm no longer outside, I am now in the endless hallway. This is one of the scenes where I actually do add the door handle, because it is a cornered shot. So it's the same deal that I did with the door handle. Or with the door itself, except this time I just created an image itself of the actual edge. I animated the door first, and then I just followed the edge of the door with that edge of the door. Yes, I followed the edge of the door with the edge of the door. Yeah, and this top layer is just to cover up the wall here. Let's see, for the railing, that was just more poly masks. One thing I have noticed, I'll go back and mention this in another spot for better detail, but Lightworks does not like it when you have a lot of poly masks for some reason. So instead, I more or less just did it in layers. So to talk about masking, let's go to a different video real quick and use it as an example if I can find it. Alright, here we are. So this shot here in particular, walking around this bench, is a little janky. It looks like it may not have been 100% perfect, but an issue I was having walking around this was that issue in particular that I was talking about, with multiple polymasks on one image confuses Lightworks, so I had to break it up into multiple. So each one was a different portion of this that I then would walk around. So, and what really sucks is that the highest count in terms of nodes that I can use on this is 16. And what's even worse is that I can't scale the size of these nodes or turn off all of this text. So the first one more or less covered the desk itself and all that stuff. And then the third one covered the top of the chair and then the one railing on the chair. And then 2 would then do the rest of the seat and the other side of the chair pole, just so that I would be able to walk behind it. And I also do a goof and do a quick glance at the camera because I forgot what I was doing. I actually did it twice. I'd really like to talk about this shot too. So this is in the main lobby. The whole thing takes place in the same exact room, just both in the real world and the otherworld version. So lining these two shots up in the game itself and matching it with the angle that I'm standing in was insanely difficult. They're both screenshots, and I took probably 10 screenshots of each until I could get them to line up perfectly. There's a few ways I was able to line this up though, because up here is the actual balcony, where the balcony is. And the steps are gone, but for the side here, I can line up the framing. Which you can see here. So all of this was a kind of a good tell to be able to tell the exact angle and everything. Now the doors are the similar size, but the framing is kind of thrown off. And then over here it's insanely dark to really be able to see, especially the doors over here. But that gave me kind of 3 points to work with. The top row here, the floor kind of, and this one door, to be able to try and get it all lined up. The transition between these, a mix of a more advanced chroma key and an acidulate, so that certain colors, I believe this is mostly like a dark black / brown, that I then would animate to kind of fade in and out. And the acidulate more or less got everything to kind of warp, so made it look kind of like that. So that gave it the visual distortion, and then the chroma keying, animating that, got it to disappear in that. Now while that's all cool and all, back to the storyboarding stuff. This wasn't mostly storyboarded, but I had to keep in mind my movement and placement in this entire room. So if you follow my movement throughout this entire scene, I'm on a path that makes sense in the entire room, in both rooms. So here I start behind the clock, I walk around in front of it. So now I'm in front of the steps and in front of the clock. And then I walk over to the wall here. This becomes more of my display piece to be able to talk about the things I'm talking about. And then when I'm done talking about that, I walk forward to the center of the room. This door here is still the door in the front. The music box would and should be right here. So I had walked from that wall back over to these guys again. So you can see I'm behind, I'm to their backs. And we're now looking the other way in the room, and we see their fronts. So the camera is now more or less facing the opposite direction in the room. I'm still facing the same way. This would be the steps, second floor. These doors would go to the back rooms with like the piano room and all the hallways and stuff. Still spatially in the same exact spot. Again, this is the front of the room. Piano, or the music box would be right here. I walk off in front of them, which then I had then come around this way. Again, front door, music box should be right here. Stairway should be right there. And then I use the same effects again. And I'm where I should be exactly in space. Then I just walk straight across over to the table over here, and that's the end of the video. So if we look at this here, I start here in front, walk over to the wall, come over to center around the pyramid heads, walk over here, and then stand over here at the end of the shot. So I am in an actual flow that makes sense and is consistent with where I am in the entire room, never breaking like a flow of movement. It wasn't super tricky to figure out, but it was still interesting knowing where I was spatially to make everything make sense. This scene here, this was mostly all just gameplay stuff. One thing I learned that while doing this dragging was that I could move his head while by having him do the look around with my controller. So I could have him walking while still looking around, and I was able to get this effect where it looked like as everything was talking and he was listening, he was starting to look around to be like he was paying attention or something. This image here, yeah, to create the shadow, I more or less created a second image of that, and then changed the brightness and contrast, and then the transparency, and then just lowered it a tab. I also did the same thing with the color correction again too, where I tried to match the darkest part of this with the darkest part of the scene so that they were somewhat close. It's still a little bit lighter. Of course, the shadow itself is the darkest and it throws it all off, but I still think it's a good shot. To get these shots in particular, I had to use the Maria ending, because she's sitting right there behind me. It kept her out of the window so I could get the shots that I needed for the window. The shot of the actual other side of this wall is not textured in the game. So what I more or less did was I took a screenshot of the wall in general and then flipped it. Was it a screenshot or was it... No, it was not a screenshot. It was an actual video clip. You can tell by the animated rain lines over top of it. So it was a video clip. And then on top of that, to get that, then I had to polymask out the window sill itself. This layer, yes. So this is the outside shot. I just cropped out the window, and then of course, but then you don't see my hands here, of course, so I had to create a second layer on top, and this is, I believe, just outlining my hands. I did not have to animate that, thankfully. But altogether, worked out pretty good. To get the consistency of the railing height for myself, this was a easy trick. I will show you by turning off the chroma key. So what I did was I took one of my pieces of exercise equipment, one of the workbenches I have, and I just stood it up. That way I knew that the height would be the same regardless of no matter what I did, and the height of it was relatively about where the height of that window is supposed to be anyway. So it all kind of worked out in the end. I was able to use that to prop my hand up on and stuff like that. Again with the Dutch angles to tell that something was going wrong. Yeah, a lot of her transformation scenes and all of her up-close shots are all pulled from the actual in-game cinematics. Some things have been reversed, flipped upside down, changed. Like this shot here should normally be the other way around. It should be her head facing up here, but I did it differently just for fun. To animate her tentacle here, all I did here, this is where my old animation skills come into play, because what this is, I believe it's on this one, yes. Again, I maxed out at 16 because that's the most I can do on this, but it's all animated. It's just a mask on this frame here, and I just animated it. It's a little crude, but I think it works. Each point being a different corner of the tentacle. And then the mask is just set to show what's below it. And because I have no frame or no clip below that, it just shows blackness. Under the routing, you can see that here. So this is the clip that I'm applying that polymask to. And because there's nothing below it, it then counts that as a black clip. Now, if I was to put this down here and apply that same thing, because there would technically be nothing below it, it would actually remove this black clip and count the chroma key from this as the bottom background, and that would appear green. For fun, I'll show. Well, actually, no, now it's showing the whole clip itself. The whole tracking of the thing is just weird. The way this mapping works for everything, it's a pain in the butt that I could probably spend an hour explaining, but I hate it. So this was another shot that I forgot to do my double layer. I had made a list of all the shots that needed it, and somehow this one lost it. So you can see the helmet here and the sword, both of them needed it. But yeah, especially right there, you can see. That's just another reuse of one of the several swings that I had done. I just lined up the timing of the animation so it looked like it hit. Same here, same thing again, except this time, to do what I did, I had to do it a little bit differently. The last time I did it on the bottom clip, and then I just left the underneath of that black, or blank, I guess, so it left a blackness a empty black clip, I guess you could say. But this time I needed to go through my character, and I could not do that. So instead, I did it to the very top clip. I made the same copy of this here, put it up top, and then I made everything dark. Put everything down to maximum so that it was all black. And then I animated it on top. This part here I just loved so much because this was part of her death animation. And then I just brought in one more conch. This shot took several attempts to get right because I needed to make sure that she wasn't in frame. Although she is in frame here, what I don't mention is that after I do all of these scenes, I then render it and then take it into another file, and then I crop that down for timing. And then once that's all timed out, then I do my sound effects and music and all that. This first pass is more or less just for visual effects only. So sometimes the clips run a little longer than they should. I shorten everything down afterwards. It's a little extra work, but it allows me to get everything I want without things accidentally messing each other up. Because if you start cropping things and dragging clips backwards to adjust your timing after you already have effects in, it has a tendency to mess things up. It's really, really weird and finicky. This one was a little more complicated too, even though most of it's not in shot. So you can see my feet behind her cage. I had to do masks on several passes for each rail and each piece as I walked by. As you can kind of see there, I had to outline all of that, and it was very tricky because of how small it was. So to get it in the exact corners, I had to more or less zoom in this top layer before I was even done, and then just fine-tune everything by hand on the dials. From here, this is the trickiest part that no one is ever going to notice how hard this was. And I'm going to show why. Let's see here. So the very bottom layer is a still from the very first shot. It stays static, I believe. Yeah, because there's no fog here. And then this shot here, look at this. See all of these dots? Every single one of these. It's almost frame per frame an animation outlining him just so that there is no Maria in that shot at all. This was insanely difficult and took a ton of time. Just so that it looked like he was walking out by himself. And then of course, you see me popping up right there at the end. Let's see, I had to do masking on this one as well. I did several layers. It looks like I did 3. Oh geez. Yeah, top layer was just the hand. So when I recorded this shot with the character, I more or less moved his head. So I had him looking to the left and then moved his head to the right. And I just made sure that when I aligned up these two shots, that his head then tracked where I went. Yeah, and then this one covered the majority of his body, which didn't need a whole lot of movement either, because he stayed pretty static until after I'd already walked by. This portion here, I just had the mask around my arm. I was going to consider trying to set up a prop to get the proper height, But I figured I'd just do a few takes and try and get my arm as still as possible, and it works for the most part. This scene is awesome. Is there anything in particular here I can talk about? Okay, so all these are so there's a lot of things happening in this, although most of these are screenshots, although some of them are video clips because there is some animation going on. But you can see the hand of my character that I was using to record the shots with, without the zoom-ins. There's not a whole lot to talk about specifically with this. To get that light to blow up like it did. Oh, yes, this is another thing I guess I could talk about. I forgot all about this. Kiana being white on the green screen. When I say that light bounces, she picked up a lot of that green. Like, she was a magnet to that green light. It just illuminated her fur. So I had to do this in multiple passes just to get rid of some of that. Let me see if I can show what I mean. Okay, so you can see the darker parts of her picked up the lighting the most. So her underbelly right there in her hand disappeared. So I more or less had to create a second layer, like I did with everything else, outliner. Yeah, like that, just to make sure that it all kind of stayed. The light itself. So I more or less just did 2 layers of the background. The very bottom layer is a permanent red with a decent sized glow, and then the top layer, just to get that little bit of a glow around it, it was a poly mask, a very detailed poly mask of 16 pieces again. So I could get every corner of it. And then what I did was I added just a little bit of feathering to it right here. And what that does is, instead of it being solid, it gives it a little bit of that. So it allows that to kind of like bleed out just a little bit. I probably could have made it a little bit more pronounced, but whatever, it sold for once it got hit. And then this was just a few different effects, mostly in software, except for this top layer, which was a random effect I got off of an effects site. But for the actual bubble there, that is layer 3. I used the bulge effect and then some rays. And I animated all of those. So it's just a circular bubble. I use the same effect for TV screens and stuff too, to kind of bring that little bit of a bulge out. Except I bring it up to almost full screen. And I change the aspect ratio a little bit so it's a little bit more of an oval, which works really good for TV screen bulging. Like an old CRT TV where the glass is domed. And then the rays are adjusted as well, changing the color thresholds and stuff to match different colors to get it red, orange, yellow, all that stuff. And then to make that cat command center, I use this. This is Hammer++. It's a third-party aftermarket modded version of Hammer, which is more or less Valve's source SDK for all of their games that they make. The original versions that Valve makes does not work anymore. They are all bugged and kind of junky. So this was an interesting thing. Originally, I only made this one room, and so all of these are just different assets from Team Fortress 2. But I knew I was going to need different camera angles that I might not be able to get in-game, even with camera hacks, which I'll show here in a bit. The UFOs posters was a little bit of a hint to the UFO ending after this. But I knew that I was going to need multiple angles, so I more or less made the entire thing, and then took everything. Whoops, I guess I can't do that since I have everything boxed in now, and just copied it again, and then rotated the whole thing, more or less creating like a little hallway that connects all the rooms. So this one here would allow me to kind of get up here and watch, or take my screenshots from above. I knew what kind of shots I needed beforehand doing this, so because I wanted to recreate at least some of the shots, at least as best I could, from the original ending. So I knew I wanted one here looking down from the command control panel, and I knew I was going to need one that would let me kind of like get closer to the wall without the wall being in the way. Even though camera hacks, well, there weren't so much camera hacks, but wall hacks would allow me to do that, but I wanted to make sure the assets weren't in the way, so I made another room without the wall, more or less copied the room, deleted the wall. A couple interesting things to note is in the lighting. So for some reason, this asset and this asset here was not lighting up properly. Even though I had all of my lights here illuminating it, because the geometry extended out past the room, it would not light up. For some reason, it seemed like it was taking the lighting from out here and applying it to the entire model, including what was inside the room. So to counteract that, I had to take lighting and put it out here, just so that this portion here would light up, which for some reason would allow the rest of it to light up. I don't know why, but it was a requirement. Once I did that, it lit up. Some of these, I mean, Source is such an old and kind of janky system to work with, but whatever. Then to do that, I just hit this fancy button here, run map. I believe I had everything run in full. This also does a full check as well beforehand to make sure there's no problems, like you're not leaking anything. The load into this does take a while. And then once we're in, it needs to load the map now, which shouldn't take long. Choose any team. For this, I had to choose a character, so I chose the Spy because his knife is the smallest weapon that they all have, which means it would more or less give me a lot of real estate. Now, since I am doing this as a test run through Hammer, it also opens up the command for me, or the command prompt for me, which I would have to have that set up in the game otherwise. Now, I do believe SV Cheats is already enabled, but I'll turn it on anyway. Alright, and then I do believe I need no clip. Alright, so that should allow me to go through walls. Now, the downside to this is that there is no walking or anything in TF2, so I'm strictly limited to this high sprint. So one mouse click and I'm like jumping from side to side and moving around. It makes getting my camera shots insanely difficult to get it like exactly as I want. But this is how I do this. And then if I need my shots here. Now the crosshair is a problem that I cannot completely get rid of. Another reason why I chose the knife, because it has a smaller crosshair. Either I was hiding it in places where it would not be easily seen, or I would put it exactly where somebody in the scene was. And then everything else was just cropped out, from the health bar to the player counts and the character arm. But this is the cat command center. Nothing fancy, nothing hidden. Just some buttons, little typewriter, storage shed, TVs. I did want to put something on the monitor while I was doing this, but I didn't want to spend more time in the video than I already was. The launch button, punch-in clock, like they were doing shifts. And then the original idea though was that the command center was going to be in the same shape as the restroom. So I do believe it should have been shorter, like it should have been right to about here, but whatever, you know, fun is fun. And last but not least, the secret UFO ending. So this was done at work on my phone. These images in particular, they started out in Canva. So here we are in Canva. The title card was the first thing. I was just gonna make the title card in it, and then I was gonna be done, but I was pretty free all night, so I did all of this in Canva. So to start out, I will give a heads up. I'm not a fan of AI, but I did use AI in this. Only for two things in particular. One is this shot right here. I found a website that lets you do photo manipulation with AI with existing photos. So I grabbed a photo of the actual parking lot and I wrote, set it on fire. And this is what I got. It actually looked pretty cool, so I was like, all right, this is what I'm using. I was like, it looks good, I like it. And then everything else was just in the edit on Canva. I just did a noir filter with that off. This is what the image looked like originally from the AI manipulation. The only other AI thing I had done with this was in these background shots with from inside the ship. What I needed was some kind of like inside command center for it, and it didn't matter because it was just gonna be a quick small background. So I just did a prompt for inside UFO. No matter what I told it, it wasn't doing exactly what I wanted, but all I really needed was a circular command room, and that's what I got. Everything above it I just deleted by hand on my phone, gave it a transparent background, and then put that in, and then just switched everything to black and white. This image as well was also an AI image. The cat paw I stole from a website. I don't remember what website. It was not Kiona's paw, but I just wrote down something like control panel, left button says restart, right button says drop off. And I was surprised enough that it even was able to spell, because you know how AI images are, they cannot put down any kind of lettering to begin with. But it worked, it was good enough, and that's what I used. Everything else, for the image of me, I still had a couple video clips of me in suit on green screen on my phone from doing reshoots the day before going to work. So I just grabbed some screenshots from those clips for what I thought would work. And then for the cat photos, either they were already on here. Actually, I think they all were on here before for other thumbnails that I have done involving our two cats for other videos. The image of James falling, actually, it's an image of James doing the pose with his chainsaw. I erased everything around him, including the chainsaw, and then just flipped him upside down, so now it looks like he's falling. A lot of these other things are just stock photos. So the water was just a random stock photo of water or an ocean. Same with the stars, the planet. They were also random stock photos from stock photo sites. The explosion as well, I just deleted the background from it. So these photos, this photo here is the same as this one here. It's the same image. This image here, which is in the background here, which yeah, it also had a little bit of the fire effect too. So I think that I put this image through that AI thing as well to get some of that fire in the background on the hills. But so this image here is what's in the background here, and this is the wall texture you see when you're in the parking lot at the beginning and end of the game. This is the actual lake from the game. All of the UFO stuff, these were all taken from Team Fortress 2, including this shot here. This was taken from one of the trailers. I can't remember what the event was, but it was some kind of alien invasion thing that they were doing. Yeah, same with this here. And then once all those were done and compiled, they then came over here into my editing software, and everything was kind of edited down for timing along with the music. Now, if you look here, you can see the music is all cut up. That's because I had to repeat sections over and over again. So the song was supposed to end more or less here, I think, and I had to repeat it again. As you can see, this clip here is the exact same. So I had to chop up the song multiple times and re-edit it just to make it work with this. So the song, so it's actually longer than UFO ending in the game by like a good minute. Because the same with the front, or the beginning here. This portion here got cut and then it got redone and started over again, just so I could extend the beginning. The ship flying was all done in animation. So it was very simple. It was just picking locations. Again, I have an old history with animation that I used to do a long time ago, so I know a lot of things that are just bringing it in, coming to a stop. There's a little bit of a bounce to it. So it comes in, slows down to a rest, and then there's a small hover. I do believe, yeah, I did enable some of the curves in the graph to allow it to have a little bit more fluidity to that animation, or at least in the from keyframe to keyframe. Same here. But yeah, I did my best to time everything up with the music from dialogue and stuff, which is why once I start talking here saying no, I don't want to edit anymore, it gets very dramatic and then continues. Like, I made sure that that punctuation of that song bit right here was just for this. Then everything else would be able to repeat on its own. There's a very mild splash too. And then I guess while we're here, I'll also prove that I actually made this song in BandLab. So each of these is a different meow from Kiana. She's a very vocal cat. She loves to meow a lot, so it was very easy to get her to meow. So the song itself, I think I had it looped 2 or 3 times for the actual credits, but in reality it's only like 30 some seconds long. It's not that long. It's just the one loop of the whole thing and then that's it. I did make some, well, we'll talk about the Kiona meows first. So this layer here is one meow recording, this one's another one, this one's another one, this one's another one, and down here is a full different one. So she meowed like a good like 5-10 times, like a good 5-10 times, and I recorded all of them, and obviously they're not going to be like different pitches, but I was able to adjust them to pitch so that they did match. So this went through a lot of iterations. I want to say I put the, like, as I was working on all the clips, I was messing with this for like a good 3 weeks. Let's mute the meows first. Yeah, so the first thing I tried figuring out was this melody right here. It took a while to figure out. There is sheet music out for this, but it didn't seem 100% accurate, at least in terms of the notes. And what I ended up finding out was that as I changed instruments on here, they all kind of have their own different tones, more or less. So what would sound good in one instrument would not sound right in another one, so I'd have to adjust the tones there. But this one here was the hardest to do. Between the sheet music that I got, it wasn't the right beat, and neither was anything I was trying to match. So I kind of took what I could and just kind of like, not so much made it my own thing, but tried to make it sound like it, but kind of did also just what felt right. It became a little harder to hear, or at least to follow, on these parts here, but I don't know, I tried my best to mimic it. Now together, they actually don't sound too bad. But like, my biggest problem I was having was that alone it just didn't sound good. So eventually I got the idea, I was like, well, if I can't get it to sound exactly like it, I might as well just start turning it into my own thing. I originally had the idea I wanted to do a full-on remix. And that got a little ridiculous, so instead, what I did was I started adding like an undertone. So with this part here now, I added like a bass line. It's mild. It's very mild. And then to go along with this melody, I added one on top of it of the same exact notes. And then together it sounded better. And then adding the cat meows in. But anyway, that is how I made my video, or at least my last video. I don't intend on doing this for every video, not behind the scenes, but all these crazy effects. It is fun, but it's insanely time consuming. The last video took me 2 months just to edit. Editing all the special effects for the entire build series took probably at least twice as long as the costume itself. I mean, I'd like to get back to working on my stuff rather than video editing. It is fun, I do enjoy it, but it's not worth the effort. The last video got maybe 200 views at most. I don't think it even got that yet. And I spent 2 months just editing alone. So I might still do these kind of skits for a standalone thing, maybe like a short or an animated short, you know, something small, short, to the point, that's entertaining. But for these long form videos, I don't think there's a market for it, so I don't think it's worth the effort. Unless somehow these videos blow up and there does become a market for it, but until then, it's not there. And I would rather be doing something worth the time, as much as I enjoy doing it. So with that said, I will see you guys in the next one. I don't know what video that will be, but I will see you in that later.